enduring issues we discussed was that we were not allowed to organize that many workshops inside the framework of ECPR joint session of workshops. Usually those workshops are having maybe 20, 25 or 30 different workshops. But when we were lucky, we were allowed to organize 2. So there was a clear demand from international relations scholars to have more opportunities to meet at sort of a European level. So it's not sort of a zero-sum whether the American approach is, if there is an American approach, there are 25 different American approaches, but if the American way of practicing the discipline is wrong, not at all. So that was not really a motivation. I have enjoyed since 1996 to go regularly and attend ISA conferences. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed it tremendously. You can always find something that has your interest, and that's how it should be. So eventually we should be able, on the European side, to create something similar. Maybe not that big, because also big comes with some cost.
And this guy, a German doing research in critical legal studies, he said, Mateusz, you are asking why there is so much this and that here during the conference. Listen, it's Europe, it's hipster international relations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my great pleasure today to welcome you all and record an interview with Professor Knud Erik Jørgensen. There are books and articles wrote about Hans-Johann Morgenthau, where he's called the Pope of International Relations. Well, for Professor Jørgensen, I would say he's an apostle of international relations theory. That's how we met for the first time on the workshop, where Professor was actually, I guess, teaching us and how to use theory in our research. Professor, thank you very much for taking your time and agreeing to join for today's interview.
Well, thank you for having me.
The first question is that, in a sense, for a lot of scholars, especially from my parts in Poland, but probably more generally for Central Eastern Europe, you are, in a sense, like the face of European AI, a spiritus movens of European AI. Now, if people are talking about European AI as something distinct, yeah, as a branch of a global discipline, you are very often mentioned as a person who done it, also institutionally helping to found ESA. And I wanted to ask you, what was your rationale? What was your idea and vision for, quote unquote, creating European AR? What was wrong with American social science of IR, like Stanley Hoffman wrote about a couple of decades ago?
Okay, yeah, it has taken quite some time of my work to be involved in developing or contributing to giving European international relations a different direction. The foundation of ISA is now already more than 10 years ago. And before we came to that point where we were bold enough to create a new international organization, I worked inside the framework of what was called the Standing Group on International Relations, which was a standing group under the auspices of the ECPR. And I became a member of the board of the standing group already, I think it was back in 2001. And one of the enduring issues we discussed was that we were not allowed to organize that many workshops inside the framework of ECPR joint session of workshops. Usually those workshops are having maybe 20, 25 or 30 different workshops. But when we were lucky, we were allowed to organize 2. So there was a clear demand from international relations scholars to have more opportunities to meet at sort of a European level. Of course, there are various national associations, and that's fine, but there were very limited opportunities to meet at a European level. So I could say that part of the rationale of creating ISA was that there was a demand that could not be met. And then we created our own joint session of workshops. And I'm going to one in early July in Istanbul. And I think it's a joint session of workshops that maybe has more than 25 workshops. So imagine this imbalance between demand and supply. It meant that European IR scholars were not given the framework within which they could develop their skills. So that was sort of a clear motivation for doing it. Also, a second motivation was that, frankly speaking, it's only a minority of European IR scholars that who can afford to go to the ISA conference in the United States. So most don't have the chance, the possibility, and on the one hand, that's a pity because it's a great conference. It's the biggest show on earth of its sort, but it's having a high price to cross the Atlantic and stay almost 1 week in the United States, hotel, accommodation, board, lodging, and what otherwise comes on top of it. So the rationale was to create not a similar, but sort of a major conference in Europe where European IR scholars could meet and exchange ideas and cultivate networks and so on and so forth. So these are 2, I would say, sort of practical matters. You can also call them political if you want, but it's sort of, yeah, up to you how you would like to see it. I saw it basically as a practical matter. There was a demand, and we sort of eventually we covered that demand. Then you ask if not the American social science, Stanley Hoffman's name for the American discipline is good enough. And I would say that American IR is a fantastic way of practicing international relations research. You have everything under the sun that you can wish for. The community is so much bigger and so much more diverse. In some sense, also so much more developed, not least organizationally. All the caucuses that exist under the umbrella of ISA, all the sections, permanent sections that exist. And within those frameworks, great work is done. Then, of course, you can say, okay, if you look at how IR is practiced in the United States and compare it to how it's practiced in Europe, you see some nuances, you see some differences. Maybe on the European side of the Atlantic, we tend to be more qualitatively oriented, for better or worse, and the Americans tend to be more quantitative oriented, again, for better or worse. It's like the age-old discussion about which method is the better one. And to me, that's a nonsense discussion because each approach has its strengths and weaknesses. And then you have to sort of choose the right one to the right job. You can also mix them if you want. At least sometimes you can. So it's not sort of a zero-sum whether the American approach is, if there is an American approach, there are 25 different American approaches. But if the American way of practicing the discipline is wrong, not at all. So that was not really a motivation. I have enjoyed since 1996 to go regularly and attend ISA conferences. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed it tremendously. You can always find something that has your interest. And that's how it should be. So eventually we should be able, on the European side to create something similar. Maybe not that big, because also big comes with some cost. You can be sort of a single person among 6,000, and it's a sort of a you can easily get lost
or be lonely in a crowd. Yeah.
But if you prepare yourself, it's like going into one of the biggest supermarkets that you can get, and this one is an intellectual supermarket. So you will never get bored. If you do, then it's your own fault.
Well, and here we are, right, with the European Convention, the Pan-European Conference, and the EWIS, EWIS.
EWIS.
That's the one you said, right, in Istanbul this year. Actually, my friend Magdalena is helping to organize it. She says that's like a nice experience for her, I guess, to learn how it's done. But then again, lately, that's what I heard from the friends from Europe. Honestly, a lot of people are a little bit disheartened with the prices of the conferences and the workshops as they are, right? And it's everywhere. It's I heard it like from the friends from IR studying at various universities all over the Europe. Yeah, they were complaining about the prices for this year's Pan-European Conference. And honestly, maybe it's me being from post-totalitarian society, but I understand that ASA is giving grants. There is a mobility fund. But then again, if you have this mobility fund that is needed for scholars to participate in the conference, it means there is some body that is choosing who is going and who is not getting the travel grant. And then, like I said, maybe there are reasons why I'm realist, because I am this sad and untrusty person, right? But you know, there might be a key for who have the grant money, right? And the other talk is, I still remember a friend with whom I talked in Sofia in 2019 at the Pan-European Conference. And this guy, a German doing research in critical legal studies, he said, Mateusz, you are asking why there is so much this and that here during the conference. Listen, it's Europe. It's hipster international relations. That's how he called the mood. And honestly, I don't know if the mood for a lot of scholars here in my part of in my neck of the woods, in Central Eastern Europe, is such that people are maybe not that interested in the cutting edge international relations, the version of which is sold or practiced during those pan-European conferences right now. Of course, I'm talking about like the amount of critical theory or neo-Marxism inspired workshops and panels that are present. That seems to be like a problem for some, but some are super happy and enjoying it a lot, because honestly, for a critical scholar here in Poland, I guess it's a good experience to go somewhere where there is a lot of people like that person. And that's definitely something that bigger European events can bring to the table for such people. So in the context of the creation of the IR, I guess so it's not it's not a creation of European discipline, it's more of the creation of organizational framework for European IR scholars. You see, in Poland, we have independent discipline of international relations. It's independent from the legal studies, from political science, and it was heralded as a great accomplishment of Polish scholarly community of IR. So, what would be your advices for the Polish international relations? Because if we have our own discipline right now, no pesky political scientists will come and spoil it for us, but it means also that we are responsible for what will happen with IR in Poland.
That's a big question and a very good question. First of all, let me say that I share the view with those who say that it's a big accomplishment. Not many national IR communities have accomplished what you now have accomplished in Poland. So I think my first advice or hope is that you will ask the Polish authorities to teach UNESCO a lesson, because actually it's in UNESCO's hand to sort of formally accept the existence of a discipline. And UNESCO, of all organizations, has not been willing to do so. According to UNESCO, international relations does not exist as a discipline. And that is not only a problem at UNESCO level, it's also a problem at the European Union level, because the European Union takes its lessons from UNESCO. Okay. So when you are applying for EU funds in competition with others, then you search in vain for a way to characterize your research, because the option of international relations does not exist. You have to pretend that you are of a different discipline, and that is already a major disadvantage. So I very much hope that the Polish authorities will take this issue to UNESCO, so that from top down there can be a new sort of level playing field between the disciplines and the fight they have between them for funds and for prestige and so on and so forth. So that's the first hope that I have, given that you now tell me that you have got an independent, recognized discipline in Poland. The second one comment is that I believe you should really take advantage of this new fact, because it means that you are now in a relatively better position to compete with your colleagues in other disciplines, again, in the Polish context for national funds. And you are better positioned in these perpetual struggles that goes on in a mixed department, which part of the department should have the next fund, given that funds are limited, always they are, or between faculties at the university level, or at the national level if there's a national social science research council or something similar. So really make the most of the advantage that you can get out of this new accomplishment. I think that's very important, because otherwise it will have no impact or limited impact, and that would really be a pity. Then, if there are some dangers, probably there are to all solutions, there is a problem, as we know. So yes, there are probably also some dangers to having now also international relations recognized as an independent discipline. One is that if you sort of stick around with your IR pals for too long, then of course you constitute an echo chamber, and that is very bad for innovation. But if you first sort of create an identity, disciplinary identity, then you are equipped to go one step further ahead and actually engage in interdisciplinary work. But you cannot do that before you know from where you come, what you represent, what you can chip into the joint enterprise that interdisciplinary work is supposed to be. Otherwise, you will be sort of the cheap part of the consortium or the research group. So that's really a danger, that you stick to yourself too long and do not sort of see yourself relatively to the insights or knowledges that other disciplines can deliver. Then, of course, you mentioned, you began by talking about the sort of state of the discipline or of the field of study in Europe. And if there were some tendencies that were maybe not of your preference, and yes, I can follow you at least part of the way. Because on the one hand, you can say, okay, it's clearly an expanding field of study. More and more do it. More people are hired, and younger people actually have a future inside the field of study. So that is a dramatic increase during the last 25, 50 years. And of course, we started from scratch in 19th century, 20th century, early 20th century. So if the field of study is expanding, I see, and this is maybe a paradox, but I see limited interest in discipline and science. It's almost like anything goes. If you as a person has decided that something goes, then you go for it. And you're not ashamed of being very sort of egocentric in your approach to things.
Well,
so that's of course bad news for discipline, that limited number of people actually want to practice a discipline and even to do research. That's even worse.
The problem with anything goes, though, is that although this famous, I guess, methodological anarchist cry by Feyerabend, well, his earlier publication was How to Be a Good Empiricist.
Yeah.
So anything goes as long as it is empiricist, in a sense that it has something to do with the world. It's not just a soliptic projection of our own mind and our own biases, right? That's the part that people who refer to Feyerabend often miss, I guess. I'm not saying you necessarily miss it, yeah, but to bring it to the listeners today, yeah, that even though anything goes is something I subscribe to. I think as long as research is, in a sense, I want to say badass, like it's really involving, you know, it's about something. So as long as it has a connection to the real world, that's good enough for me. As long as the person conducting the research understands like what process are they using to get to know something, that's good enough for me. Yeah, but okay, I think we are circling this this question a little bit for the last, I guess, 20 minutes. So let's get to it, I guess. What do you think is the current state of IR as a field of study in Europe, broadly speaking? And you know, like I alluded to, so we have people complaining about pricey conventions and workshops, yeah, that are basically overpriced in their view. In a sense, we have lack of original theorizing. That's the gist of what you are writing. I guess that's how I read a lot of what you're writing. That we don't have European Hans Morgenthau, that we don't have European Kenneth Waltz, that people are not saying, listen, this is my theory, yeah, those are the concepts of my theory, and it is great to explain or it will facilitate your understanding of this particular piece of world. Yeah, we are supposedly lacking it. In a sense, like I said, it might be that I am, you know, I am from where I am, so I am a little bit conservative, being from Central Eastern Europe, and I might be a little bit wary about Marxism or critical theory just because of the historical experience of my nation, and I'm absolutely not downplaying it, right? But we might say that there is a domination of a certain idea of the discipline that have this strong neo-Marxist and critical tinge that is something that is drawing people out, basically. Yeah, so we have all those problems, at least how I see them. You of course might agree, one might disagree and say those are not the problems, right? But like, what is your take on the contemporary state of IR as a field of study and the area of interest?
Well, first of all, I think that it's sort of misleading to say that because you are from East Central Europe, you are bound to be conservative. East Central Europe has for centuries been sort of a powerhouse of innovation, also in the social sciences. and in all other areas of life. There's a Czech structuralist school in linguistics. There is a lot of revolutionary practices in terms of politics. Most of the Second International intellectuals came from Eastern Poland, what is now Ukraine, I believe. So psychoanalysis came out of Vienna or the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and so on and so forth. So East Central Europe has before been a powerhouse of innovation. And it might not be any longer, I don't know East Central Europe that much, but at least I wrote my master's thesis about the solidarity movement in Poland. That was quite innovative at the time, because in East Central Europe, nobody has seen anything like it. And it made a profound change for the entire region. Then, of course, the trends, the fads, and all that that you meet at conferences and that John says in your workshops. I think it seems to me that maybe it's because sort of mainstream scholars are too lazy. Maybe they are not sort of as hungry for decision-making power as are critical scholars. At least it seems that critical scholars, even if they're not the many, but the few, managed to get into leading positions in various associations, not only ISA, but also BISA and elsewhere. So maybe sort of mainstream scholars should sort of take part of the responsibility of the state of affairs on their own shoulders. I think that would be a first step. Then I agree with you that the innovation in the field of study or the discipline is quite limited, both theoretically and methodologically. And it has been for some time. It's sort of the same old orthodoxies that you meet when you sort of attend conferences. It is almost as we walk in circles. There is not that dynamism in the field that I experienced during the 1990s, when there was really leaving old positions and getting to new positions. But now it's just sort of what is that, stepping water or walking in circles. It's a bit sad actually for us IR scholars that is the case. And also, I think this tendency is empowered by some very active citation cartels. People tend to cite each other and thereby sort of provide legitimacy to continue the way that they did yesterday and today and also will do tomorrow. So that is where the innovative part is missing. There's not that much new thinking around. If there is new thinking, it's more of the old thinking, just in a continued. Then I tend also to believe that the field of study is a field of study that is fairly soaked in what I would call normativity first and analysis second. So it's almost like the conclusion is drawn before any analysis is even started. And that is exactly the opposite of science, where surprises should be sometimes possible, not always. I mean, sometimes you can get confirmed what you already had a hunch about, but you should at least allow yourself to be surprised, to find some evidence that you did not expect to find. But this is not that widespread in the discipline or in the field of study, as it maybe should be. So yes, I think I share some of your sort of not so positive feelings about developments in the discipline. On the other hand, yes, if somebody have to do something about it, it's those who are critical of the critical.
Well, you see, to be completely honest, it's maybe my gripe is I always liked to read a little bit of postmodern thought and Marxist thought. I remember I read Lenin's and we can talk all we want about how much Lenin was actually a critical thinker, yeah, and how much he was hijacking other people's ideas. But I still remember like reading the imperialism as a last stage of capitalism during the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. It was absolutely stunning to see so much have changed for so little to actually change, yeah. And that's like and I don't know, my gripe was that at some of my encounters with critically minded scholars from Western Europe, and maybe those are my own complexes, you know, who knows, it was like I have read this literature and this literature and I find them equally fun. I learned from this literature, no matter if I read Gramsci or I read Spikeman or Wolfers or have I read Althusser. Yeah, it was all a part of my intellectual journey, and I cherish even those pieces of thought that I don't agree with, yeah, because they are
Yeah,
part.
that's the same. That's the most dry Marxism you can get your hands on.
So and then, you know, and with this mindset I'm coming for international conference, and I hear, look, just don't read those realists because they were mostly white males, and you know, you shouldn't read them because they will destroy your discourse, and they are dangerous for you to read, so you lose your edge as a critical thinker. Right, I have heard this kind of speech on numerous occasions, and I don't know, it felt bad for whatever reason, yeah. So I'm coming here with the open head, and somebody is just cognitively closed, and I guess that's my biggest gripe. It's not about the color of ideas, I guess, because it might have been as well, like if there would be a real, I guess there was a realist orthodoxies in the 80s, and probably for a lot of more critically minded people, they would have very similar experience, just with the other side of the equation. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I would just prefer of more like just an open intellectual exchange without like guarding oneself from, you know, what is kosher or not at this particular stage of the development of the discipline. I don't know, but that's me. That's me being an absolute idealist, I guess, in that manner. So if we are talking about idealistic stuff, in one of the best pieces I have ever read, the Max Weber told about being an intellectual as a vocation. To be an academic means to have a vocation. It is not a job. It's a calling that is also a job. So you need to do it well, but it's also a calling that you need to have a certain ethos, and you need to want to have a certain impact on reality. And what's your take on IR scholars as public intellectuals? So should we be public intellectuals? Should we strive to get more voice in social media, traditional media? Or should we stick to our science and guard our objectivity from the perils of public intellectualism? Because it's obviously, right, if you start to be a public intellectual, you start advocacy for certain policy goals, for example, and of course it will spoil your objectivity as a scholar. But then again, right, we can listen to people like Mersheimer, famous IR scholar, who actually have a voice of a public intellectual denying genocide in Ukraine, right? Which is, for me, I'm a realist, yeah, and Mersheimer is a fellow realist. Whatever I think about particulates of his theory, I consider this person a fellow member of the same tradition, right? And I guess nowadays, with this certain brand of activism, when we hear different people saying different things all over the internet, probably member of any intellectual tradition within IR could find a person like Mersheimer, yeah, who is saying things that are problematic, for whatever reason, right? So what is your take on international relations scholars as public intellectuals? Like, what is the extent of our engagement with the popular public?
So the issue about international relations scholars and public intellectuals, a good preparation for this would have been to read the book by Cornelia Navari about public intellectuals, but I didn't manage to do that in time. So let me just say that when looking around, who is performing and so on, I don't see anybody who performs like Raymond Aron did back in his time. You can also point to a Johan Galtung, who was also a very prominent public intellectual. If I see someone who is almost always and has been for the last 30 years, if not more, then it's Timothy Garton Ash. Mm-hmm. Of course, he's a historian and not an IR scholar, so it doesn't count. So I don't really see some very obvious examples of current contemporary public intellectuals who has a background as an IR scholar. It seems that we academics, we tend to engage in academic politics if we engage in politics at all. And that is for most people more than enough. The wider public, it's already in the hands of amateurs and who claim themselves to be experts, or they are failed IR scholars who didn't really manage to stay in the university system and then instead pop up on TV channels and interpret what is happening in with this conflict or that conflict and so on and so forth. So it's I don't know if you can call it sad, but I think it's a fact. Then, of course, you can say that there are quite many who engage in public affairs, but behind the scenes. What I have in mind is those who engage in various roles as advisor. It can be for governmental agencies, it can be for political parties. They are not public faces, they are not in the front line, but they feed those who are with constant information about something that possibly can make their cause a better cause or a more forceful cause. And I think that should not be underestimated, but of course that is not the public intellectuals that you have in mind. Then you mentioned John Mearsheimer, who is definitely an IR scholar, one of the most prominent, well-known, and so on and so forth. When he is engaging in public affairs, it is in the front line. He he gives interviews, he gives lectures, and so on and so forth. And it's amazing that one person, one man, can be so different in his take on war and conflict. I mean, if you compare his take on Russia's war in Ukraine, then it's well known which position he has. And what is more difficult to understand is why he has that position. But if you then listen to various interviews or lectures on the conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians, it's a completely different John Mearsheimer. There cannot be any neo-realism, structural realism in that, because it's between one state and a non-state. So it's really not a systemic level at all. But nonetheless, he has a very, very bold interpretation of events. It's very controversial because he's not that friendly towards Israel at all. Of course, he has a reputation of not being friendly to Israel or to the Jewish lobby in the United States. So maybe there's a continuity of sorts that is playing. But his understanding of the game, if you can call it a game, of course, that's doubtful if you can, but he knows the Israeli positions in their colorful diversity. He knows the position among the Palestinians. He knows the position in Hezbollah up in Lebanon. He knows the Iranians and the Saudis and so on and so forth. So that is an international relations scholar performing the role as a public intellectual, commenting on, in this case, the war, the conflict around Gaza, or between those two parties in that part of the world. So it's a little bit unpredictable. You can also say that it was not sort of an easy task to write. Well, it was maybe an easy task to write the article he did with Stephen Wald, 2003, when he heavily criticized the George W. Bush administration's attack or invasion of Iraq. They said it was unnecessary. There was no balance of power at play. It was a pure sort of adventure and pure driven by various neoconservative ideologues. So from a realist point of view, and I think this is a very sort of a good example of what a realist view on war invasions is. It is not to sort of emphasize military power and the use of it always, not at all. Realists tend to be very constrained. Morgenthau was a fierce critic of the Vietnam War.
On a very good argument based on the sources of national power. He was saying basically that the war is destroying the US morale. Yeah, people felt bad about themselves being Americans because their boys were doing such atrocities abroad, right? So it was creating a huge problem for the Cold War. Well, that was the gist of Morgenthau's argument. Yeah. Well, honestly, Mersheimer is someone that strikes my own personal nerve, and actually strikes a nerve of a lot of the guys that are calling themselves European realists, that maybe we will do something about it and try to publish more or be more present, honestly. And that's also I guess his impact on the social reality, right? But then again, how many today my wife asked me, Mateusz, when will you be as famous as Hans Morgenthau, for example? That's my beautiful and talented wife asking me those questions. Maybe everyone needs a Lady Macbeth in his life. Every male need a Lady Macbeth in his life from time to time. Anyway, yeah. So she's asking me, and I'm saying, well, honey, listen. It's like you need to have a great faculties of mind, like Morgenthau had, but you also need to have a very peculiar moment to say what you have to say for it to catch up, right? And after the Second World War, for a person such as Morgenthau, right, he wasn't that successful before just before the war when he came to the US, right? Or during the war, he wasn't so successful. He was successful only when actually a Cold War started to hit properly. Yeah, so that was what created the need for his theory, I would say, right? So that's the other thing that maybe and that's like a little bit about what you're saying, right? That maybe we are not innovative enough as theoretically innovative within the discipline, right?
There has to be a match between what we offer of analysis and take on events and the ongoing international situation. If there's not such a match, then there is a limited chance that our books will sort of reach more than our closest friends and colleagues.
Well, my inner symmetrist will say that maybe that's a part where both realist scholars in Europe, but also critical scholars in Europe are the same as in failing a little bit in that regard, I guess. Well, we touched a little bit upon the history of the discipline of IR in Europe. We talked about the current state of affairs. So, of course, what is your What is your dream scenario for the international relations in Europe? Like, you know, in 20 years, you are like one fine day, you just open your window, look at your, I don't know, computer, learn about what happened with your, what happens with your friends, what are they doing, what are they preoccupied with, and you see them doing international relations in a way that make you happy. You know, what's the dream scenario before the discipline for you?
I think my dream scenario is maybe characterized by 4 features. The first feature I hope for is that we begin to pay more attention to what we do, each of us who are situated in Europe, so that there will be sort of a shared understanding, not necessarily agreement, but a shared understanding of where we are at a European level. I think that would be a formidable development, and it will change a lot of things. I had the same hope when I engaged now 23 years ago in the Standing Group of International Relations, because that was one of the purposes that we created sort of an umbrella or a framework in which we could begin to discover each other. So this is definitely a feature of my dream scenario. Then I hope that we would be able to begin to produce research studies that is so interesting that people outside of Europe would find them interesting, also for their understanding of what is happening in the world. Maybe so that they would even begin to think about coming to our conferences, but in general have an interest in exchanging views. I think that would also be a fantastic dream scenario feature. And my third, or the third feature of my dream scenario is the one that I wrote a book about, what is international relations, which is kind of a wish list of what the discipline could become, or how the field of study could become a discipline. And I, for that reason, hope that we would begin to have a shared understanding what's in the discipline and what's not discipline. I mean, there are many fantastic ideas, reflections about international phenomena that is not international relations, the discipline. So, in other words, what's in it and what's not in it. That's a very, very, of course, it's a borderline that has to be thoroughly discussed. There has to be a conversation about where to draw that line. But before we begin to talk about the topic, I don't think that we can actually cultivate that discipline that I believe that we deserve to have. And then the final feature is that we would begin to understand what could be called the dynamics of the war in Ukraine and potential wars elsewhere. Because if we do not understand those dynamics, then it seems to me that we would become increasingly irrelevant. I mean, the knowledge we produce, if we cannot even understand what are the driving forces of that conflict, of that war, then how can we possibly be relevant for anything else? I mean, that is part of the core of what I consider the discipline. And it has always been.
I like your call for generosity, I guess, because that's how I like to call it. That if I take my time, just like you decided to spend this hour talking with me, and this is generous of you because you are using your time. You can be elsewhere. You can be doing something else. Yeah, I think this general disposition of generosity towards others, because they are part of something bigger that is the discipline, right? It's a disposition we definitely need. Yeah, the time to try to understand somebody else, the time to read their texts and maybe give them some feedback or give them some encouragement, right? Just I sometimes I don't know if it isn't like the specific quality of how it's have been in international relations in Poland, but sometimes there is this certain solitude or loneliness of being a scholar that only like gets a little easier existentially when you meet someone else who actually read your text and properly criticized it, you know, like in the way that shows that the person really took their time to just understand what you had to say and they thoroughly disagree with it, but not because they think it's dumb, but because it's like worthwhile to get into the critical conversation with. And that's for me, like intellectually speaking, those are the moments where I don't feel alone, where somebody took enough time to actually get into the critical conversation about something that I have wrote, and then I can you know do the same for that person. And honestly, of course, we can try to forget about this loneliness or run away from this loneliness by watching at our Hirsch index soaring, yeah, seeing the more and more citations that we have under our belt. But the question is whether or not those people are actually reading what we had to say, or do they just browse through the abstract and figured out that they need to do literature review, so they need to put something in it, right? That would be my a little bit maybe existential take on the matter. But I do like your scenario, yeah, because although yeah, we probably need to remember about exclusion in a sense, like it would be lovely if everything would be open and borderless and happy-go-lucky. Unfortunately, it seems that the borders are something that is very relevant to our human condition in general, and we might hope that our human condition would be a little bit different. But then again, that's a hope that a lot of people during intellectual history of mankind have expressed, right? And
I like your emphasis on solitude and vocation much more than your emphasis on the stats. And I think that this solitude, yes, it's a necessity, I believe, and it's bearable because it should be sort of complemented by those social gatherings where we, yes, talk about things, we exchange ideas. We find out sometimes why we are in disagreement, and other times we find out, okay, actually we are not in that much of a disagreement. Maybe we speak different languages and didn't really understand each other. That is what I believe is a sort of reflexive thinking all about. And that's why we should attend conferences. That's where we meet people.
yeah,
Or at least go to workshops and
learn how to conduct theory-driven research.
yeah, and also, of course, risk our understandings, because that is what you do when you present a paper. You risk your own understanding of what is right or wrong, what is good or bad, and that, of course, can be a terrible experience, but it can also be a very sort of a fruitful one that is really something that you keep in your mind for a very long time.
Couldn't agree more, especially that if I hadn't been going to those workshops, I haven't had met you, like what it was maybe 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, and we wouldn't have this conversation now. So I'm in absolute agreement. Professor, thank you very much for today. Thank you very much that you took your time to answer my question, and we had this this conversation. And to you, dear viewers, remember to leave likes, subscribe the channel, also follow Professor Jørgensen on his own social media, and you have all a beautiful evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matthäus. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.